Let's start with the squad risk overview dashboard, which is in our data portal platform. The squad risk overview is one of the most valuable dashboards for day-to-day management. It gives you a simple snapshot of your squad's physical state on that day, flagging players who are outside of your choice of ranges for a variety of metrics and information. We use it to quickly identify players showing elevated risk profiles, maybe their acute chronic ratios are high, or they haven't sprinted in a period of time. It also helps us monitor how workloads are trending over time. Once you have this information, you can be proactive, plan ahead, adjust sessions, reduce volume, or even just flag a conversation with a coach. The system uses 6 key metrics: total distance, high-speed running, sprint distance, accelerations, decelerations, and max speed, giving you consistent, comparable insight across the squad. The days since section of the dashboard is one of the simplest but most powerful parts. It answers a very practical question. When was the last time each player experienced the demands they'll face in a game? Every metric here is color-coded: green, yellow, red. So you can instantly see who might need more exposure or recovery. These thresholds aren't fixed. You can adjust them to fit your own load model, training frequency, or competition schedule. For example, if you have a 4-day build in compared to the more British model of a Wednesday off in a normal Saturday to Saturday schedule, you can adjust the number of days in a row for your schedule. Days in a row gives you a simple view of how long players have gone without a true recovery day. This number will vary depending on your schedule. For example, with a normal 4-day build-up to a Saturday match, players in particular, squad players, might train Tuesday through Sunday, 6 days in a row. That's fine because it's structured into the periodization plan. But when extra games are added, say a Tuesday fixture the following week, followed by training Wednesday, that can quickly become 9 consecutive days. That's where risk of accumulated fatigue increases, particularly for your subs and squad players who don't get the same rest as starters. Use this flag to review your periodization before adapting. Maybe you run post-match exposures for non-starters, then schedule a full squad recovery day to break the load cycle. Next, we have days since achieving over 90% of your max speed. This indicator tracks sprint exposure, one of the most effective ways to prevent hamstring injuries. Research shows players should reach 90% or more of their max speed at least once or twice a week. But the key is timing. Doing it the day before a match isn't ideal. Plan sprint exposure either early in the week during your bigger pitch training days or after a match for players who played limited minutes. Remember, players don't always hit 90% in games. Most top out around 85 to 90%. So we can't just assume match play covers this. The live application is your best friend here. If you see a player at 87% in training, you can safely repeat a drill to push them over 90%. Post-session, you lose that chance until the next day. The number of days since achieving over 500 meters metric checks when players last hit a meaningful volume of high-speed running, a moderate volume of high speed to maintain load in the hamstrings. It's mainly about maintaining chronic exposure to protect against spikes in load. Ideally, players should hit about 2 match volumes of high-speed running each week. For wingers, fullbacks, and strikers, this usually happens naturally in training. But your centre-backs or central midfielders often need topping up after sessions. Use live monitoring to manage this in real time. It's much better to hit the target during training than realize afterwards that they've missed it. If a player goes more than your chosen number of days without reaching 500 meters of high-speed running, they're flagged. It's your cue to plan additional exposure or conditioning when appropriate. The indicators number of days since 45 and 80 minutes played are all about match exposure. Training is essential, but it can never perfectly replicate the physical, mental, and emotional demands of a real game. The 45-minute mark is great for players returning from injury or building fitness. It helps you track how long it's been since they've had meaningful match time and decide when they might need a controlled reintroduction, maybe through a under-21 match or internal friendly. The 80-minute metric is more about full match readiness. If a player hasn't had that level of exposure for 3 weeks or more, they'll likely have reduced conditioning and match sharpness. That's when you might look to get them game time elsewhere. The key caveat is the 5 substitute rule. Many attacking players rarely hit 80 minutes now, even when playing regularly. So again, context is everything. And this is where communication with your head coach is absolutely vital. If there's an under-21 game coming up, you might have a couple of players who could benefit from it, but you'll want to check. Are they likely to feature in the next few first team matches? Would the coach rather have them training with the squad instead of missing sessions to play? Your role here isn't to make that decision. It's to inform the coach of each player's status so they can make the best call. That's how performance data becomes part of the decision-making process, not a replacement for it. Next, we will concentrate on the acute chronic workload ratio, or ACWR. These data points are in the squad risk overview, but also in its own dashboard, which we will cover later on. ACWR is one of the most common tools used in load monitoring. It compares a player's recent workload, the last 7 days, against their longer-term average over 28 days. The goal is to identify whether they're working too much, too little, or maintaining a healthy balance. We apply this across metrics like total distance, high-speed running, sprint distance, and accelerations or decelerations. The principle comes from Tim Gabbett's work and has since been developed further by clubs like Southampton, showing how ratios between 0.8 and 1.5 are generally considered optimal for maintaining performance and minimizing injury risk. Research shows that the ideal range we want players in is between 0.8 and 1.5. That's the sweet spot where load is being applied progressively, enough to drive adaptation without pushing players into risky spikes. And when the ratio climbs above 1.5, it means their most recent workload has jumped well above what their body is used to. That's where injuries often happen. On the other hand, if it falls below 0.8, it means the player isn't being exposed to enough load to maintain conditioning. Over time, that can actually increase their injury risk once they're asked to perform at match intensity. The key with AC ratios is context. They're a really useful guide, but they're not gospel. For example, if a player has been injured for more than a couple of weeks, when they return to rehab, their ratio might skyrocket to 4.0. That doesn't mean they're in danger. It just reflects that they've been out for an extended period. You have to understand this and then progressively build players back up. Similarly, during fixture congestion, acute load naturally increases. The challenge then isn't to panic, but to manage recovery better and taper when possible. On the flip side, during an international break, your non-traveling players will often drop below 0.8 because of planned rest. That's not a problem, it's actually beneficial. So the real art of using these ratios is knowing when to act and when to let the data simply inform your understanding. And one of the best uses of this dashboard is to look forward, not just backward. If you know a player's sprint distance ratio is already at 1.7 and the next 2 sessions are 11 versus 11 games, you can predict a further spike due to the opportunity they will have to find Spartan distance. That's your opportunity to potentially adjust, maybe tweak their reps, rotate them into recovery drills, or communicate with the coach about altering the pitch dimensions. This isn't about limiting performance. It's about controlling exposure so that players stay robust and available. Be aware of the limitations that comes with using this, as Jo Clubb has highlighted in her research and applied practice. The acute chronic ratio should be treated as an indicator, not an instruction. It's sensitive to missing data. A few lost GPS sessions can change the output completely, and it doesn't account for context like illness, travel, or tactical role. So rather than using it as a trigger to pull players out, use it to start a conversation. Combine it with subjective measures, RPE, wellness, even what the coach is observing in training. When we blend data with dialogue, that's when it becomes truly powerful. To summarize, the acute-chronic workload ratio helps us see how players are coping with recent demands compared to what their body is conditioned for. Keeping ratios in that balanced range is ideal, but the real power is in using it proactively, planning load, preventing spikes, and supporting decision-making alongside the coaching and medical team. And when you combine it with the other dashboard metrics like days since, sprint, or match exposure, you start to get a really complete picture of player readiness and risk. Right, so we've already covered what this dashboard does, how it works, and what kind of insights you can get from it. Now let's go and take a look at the dashboard itself. I'll take you on a walkthrough, going through all of the key points step by step. When you click on the squad risk overview inside your data portal, you'll see there are 4 tabs across the top. These are overview, risk analysis players, risk analysis squad, and reference setting. We'll start with the overview tab. On the left-hand side, you'll see the players and their positions. Moving from left to right, you'll find the key metrics. The first is number of days in a row, which shows how many consecutive days a player has trained or played. Then we have the days since metrics. How many days it's been since the player last completed 500 meters of high-speed running, played 45 minutes in a match, played 80 minutes in a match, or reached above 90% of their maximum speed. This is then followed by the acute to chronic ratios for the 5 key metrics: total distance, high-speed running, sprint distance, explosive accelerations, and explosive decelerations. Each of these metrics will show a color-coded box based on the player's data, green, yellow, or red, with a value inside showing their most recent result. If you see a gray box with no value, that simply means the player hasn't achieved that metric yet. For example, they might not have played enough minutes or reached the required speed threshold. Next to look at is the filters on the dashboard. The date filter is your main control, and this lets you easily check the status of your squad on any chosen day. For example, you might want to see where your players were physically on the Thursday before a game or after a heavy training block. You can also filter by group, position, or individual players. What's really useful here is the ability to deselect players manually. Say if a player has been injured for 3 months, you don't need them influencing the dashboard data. You already know they're unavailable and can't hit those targets until they return to the grass for rehab. This makes the overview tab a daily snapshot of your active trainable squad, the players who are influencing your immediate training decisions. The next tab we'll move to is reference setting. This is where you can customize how the dashboard behaves. On the right-hand side, you'll see the conditional formatting controls. This is where you can set the thresholds for green, yellow, and red for each metric. For example, your default setup might be green for 0 to 5 days, yellow for 5 to 8 days, and red for more than 8 days since that metric was last achieved. You can adjust these values based on your own schedule or philosophy. For example, if your team has a very congested fixture period or an irregular training rhythm, you can make the system reflect your environment more accurately. The idea is that this dashboard adapts to you, not the other way around. Now, over on the left-hand side, you'll see a section titled Importance Weighting, and this is where further customization happens. This allows you to decide how much weight each metric carries in the overall risk calculation. You can adjust these using percentages. So, for instance, you could make days since above 90%, max speed account for 100% of the risk score if that's the most important metric for your setup. Or you could spread the weighting across multiple metrics, Maybe give higher weightings to the acute to chronic ratios and a smaller percentage to the days since metrics. The weighting system gives you full control. You decide what matters most in your environment. If you leave everything at the default setting, the dashboard will simply add up the risk scores from all 10 metrics, the 5 days since and the 5 acute to chronic ratios, and divide by 10 to create an average score. This flexibility is one of the most valuable features of the dashboard. Every team is different. Some focus on chronic load management, some on sprint exposure, others on recovery. The importance weighting system lets you align the dashboard to your club's philosophy while still keeping the same underlying structure. So let's quickly break down how that risk score is actually created. Each metric is color-coded, green, yellow, or red. And behind each color is a numeric score. Green equals 0, yellow equals 0.5, and red equals 1. These scores are then adjusted based on your chosen weighting and combined to create an overall player risk score. The final result is color-coded again. We have white for low overall risk, between 0 and 0.29, yellow for moderate risk, between 0.3 and 0.49, and red for high risk, anything above 0.5. So when you open up the risk analysis players or risk analysis squad tabs, that overall score is what you're seeing. It's a summary of how those 10 metrics combine to indicate each player's physical readiness and exposure. Next, let's move over to the risk analysis players tab itself. This gives you an individual breakdown for each player across all the same metrics, your days since and acute to chronic ratios. The main addition here is the risk column, which shows each player's overall risk score based on the weightings you set earlier in the reference settings. The color coding is white for low risk, yellow for moderate, and red for high risk, making it easy to scan and identify players who may need closer attention. So remember, the dashboard isn't predicting injuries, it's flagging potential risks. Red doesn't mean stop, it means investigate, discuss, and plan. It gives you the data to talk with coaches and staff about how to manage training, recovery, and player availability more effectively. Ultimately, it's about being proactive rather than reactive, giving you time to make informed, evidence-based decisions that keep players on the pitch. Now, let's look at how some of these indicators translate into real-world application. First, with sprint exposure benchmarking, this is all about making sure players are regularly hitting their top speeds. If they haven't been exposed to 90% of their max speed in over a week, the risk of a sprint-related injury goes up. You can use this data to plan sprint exposures safely, maybe through small conditioning drills or top-up sprints for your substitutes after a game. It's about keeping that exposure regular and controlled. Then we've got managing consecutive training days. This is one of the simplest yet most overlooked areas. Players who go too many days in a row without rest can accumulate fatigue. The dashboard helps you spot this early so you can reduce volume, taper a session, or schedule an individual recovery day. Here are a few more real-world applications of the dashboard. Managing high acute to chronic ratio spikes. When a player's ratio suddenly jumps, that's usually due to a short-term increase in load, maybe a heavy session or congested fixture schedule. You can adapt early by modifying pitch size, rotating players, or planning an extra recovery block. Finally, return to play benchmarking. For players coming back from injury, you want to make sure they've hit their key exposures, 90% max speed, and at least 500 meters of high-speed running. Once they've ticked those boxes, you can plan 45 minutes in a friendly or under-21 game before reintroducing them fully. Again, this is all about balance, using objective data to guide decisions, but keeping flexibility based on context. Now, let's take some of those real-world scenarios we've talked about and see how they actually play out in the dashboard. First of all, remember that your data has to start somewhere. If it's the first day of preseason, that's absolutely fine. But for the first few weeks, the dashboard will be difficult to use for any real insights. Players won't yet have achieved their days since metrics, and their acute to chronic ratios will often look inflated, maybe sitting above 3.0 simply because there's not enough data behind them. For example, here on the 12th of July, only a week into the data set, you can see some metrics in grey, meaning no data and very high acute chronic values. This is totally normal early on. The key is context. The dashboard becomes more powerful and accurate the longer your data builds. The same principle applies when your squad has extended time off, for instance, during an international break where you have a planned break. If you look at the 10th of September here, most of the squad are showing low acute chronic scores, and their days since values are sitting in yellow or close to turning yellow. In this case, it's because the non-international players had a week off. So chronic load naturally drops, and once training resumes, you might see a temporary spike in their ratios. Again, context is everything. The data is only as valuable as your understanding of what's been happening in your environment. Now let's move forward to the 27th of September. This is a Friday, the day before a game. The first thing we can do is tidy the view. Here I'm going to deselect Stevens and Young. Both appear to be injured, which we can tell from their limited chronic data and their grey days since boxes. By doing that, we can now focus purely on the available squad, those training fully and those currently in rehab. Let's look more closely at Harris. Harris hasn't played 45 minutes in 28 days and hasn't played 80 minutes in 39 days. He also hasn't sprinted in 10 days. So we've now got 3 potential flags. Looking ahead, we know there's an under-21 game on Monday, the 29th, which coincides with a recovery day for the first team. The next training session for the first team is Tuesday, the 1st of October, and the next match is on Saturday, the 5th. This gives us several options to think about. First of all, speak with the head coach to see whether Harris is likely to be involved in tomorrow's match. If he is, then keep him with the squad. If he doesn't come on or plays limited minutes, you can use post-game conditioning to hit his high-speed volume, maybe even get him over 90% of his max speed, and he'll be ready to recover and rejoin training on Tuesday. If the head coach decides he's not going to feature, you could give him Saturday off, let him train with the under-21s on Sunday, and then play the full game on Monday. If that's the case, plan for a recovery session on Tuesday and potentially modified training on Wednesday, especially if the first team have a high-intensity pitch session. The key here is communication. You're not making selection decisions, you're informing the coaching team to help make the decisions. You're presenting objective information and possible options based on the data, allowing the head coach to make the best decision for the team. Let's look at one final example. It's Friday, the 14th of February. Again, the day before a game. There's a training session for non-starters on the Sunday, a light match day -1 session for everyone on Monday, and another fixture on Tuesday. Straight away, we can see that Murray and Lewis are both flagged red for days in a row, currently on 8 consecutive days of training or matches. That's unusual for this schedule and could indicate accumulated fatigue. If this continues, they're on track to hit 12 consecutive days, which is a potential overload risk. Both players have also gone 7 days since sprinting at 90% of their max speed. They're still in green for now, but will turn yellow the next day. So can we tick off both flags if possible? These two are both part of the match day squad and often come on as substitutes. Giving them a full recovery day, the day of game isn't realistic. The easy option is to carry on as normal and hope they get through the run of games, but the smarter option is to be proactive. You could plan some post-game conditioning after the match, depending on how many minutes they play. If they come on for around 10 to 20 minutes, that's a great chance to get extra high-speed volume into them, maybe even a controlled 90% exposure if they're feeling good. In this case, also be aware of Murray's low sprint chronic volume. That then allows you to give them a recovery day. alongside the starters, ensuring everyone is fresh for Tuesday's match. In other words, you've reduced the days in a row load, ticked off their high-speed exposure and improved readiness, all while staying ahead of potential fatigue. Like all real-world scenarios, these aren't black and white answers, they're conversation starters. The aim isn't to remove players from training, it's to manage them intelligently. The data interlinks, each metric adds another layer of context, and by using them together, you can be proactive in your planning, not reactive after a problem occurs. That's what the dashboard is really about, combining evidence, context, and communication to make better, safer decisions for your squad.